Hi, my name is Hannah Jane Pritchett, current U of A GIST Master's student. Welcome to the University of Arizona GIST podcast. Our hosts are Chris Lukenbiel with special co-host Ya-Ching Lin, with our topic being efforts related to the invasive species of bufflegrass in southern Arizona, with guests Kim Franklin and Aaryn Olsson. Let's get started.
Hi, my name is Chris Lukenbiel. I'm the director of the UA GIST programs. And today on our podcast, we're excited to have a themed podcast on efforts related to the invasive species of bufflegrass in southern Arizona. And with us today, I have a co-host who is an alumni from the GIST programs, Ya-Ching Lin, who works at the Desert Museum now, working with the conservation efforts for the invasive species of bufflegrass. Welcome, Ya-Ching.
Hello. Hi, everyone. So my name is Ya-Ching Lin, and I'm now working as a GIS analyst at the Arizona Sonora Desert Museum since last December. And it's my first time working in conservation. I've been learning a lot about bufflegrass and conservation. And today, two of my very talented colleagues are here to also share a little bit about our work. I'm going to pass this on to Kim Franklin.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Chris and Ya-Ching. I'm Kim Franklin. I'm the Conservation Science Manager at the Desert Museum. My background is actually in entomology, but I've been working on bufflegrass for over a decade now. I started out by studying bufflegrass in the state of Sonora, Mexico, south of the border. And I have a little bit of remote sensing experience. But currently, I coordinate the regional effort to control bufflegrass in the Tucson Basin and Pima County. And I'll pass it on to Aaryn Olsson.
Thanks, Kim. I'm Aaryn Olsson, and I'm a software engineer at Planet Labs, but I'm here in my capacity here as a all things bufflegrass mapping guru, self-appointed guru, I guess. I actually teach adjunct at the University of Arizona, and Ya-Ching, I was lucky to have her as a student of mine. I teach open source GIS in the program, and I also moonlight for the Sonora Desert Museum as an image scientist, following up a lot of my efforts at the University of Arizona, attempting to map bufflegrass through remote sensing, and trying to still do that a little bit and contribute to that effort in whatever way I can.
Well, thank you all for your introductions. I also wanted to mention that the GIST program has been doing a number of projects for over the last decade with related to bufflegrass and continue to do so. So this is a great time to even think about, as current students, and if you're thinking about joining the program, related to your master's projects, to look in to help the cause on this and to learn about the cause as we go through the podcast. But I'd like to first ask maybe Kim, like, what is bufflegrass and why is it a problem in southern Arizona? Why is it perceived as a problem?
So bufflegrass is an African perennial bunch grass native to the savannas of Africa. Think about the savannas of Africa. These are environments that are subject to frequent drought, heavy grazing, and fire. So bufflegrass is an incredibly robust grass, resistant to drought, resistant to grazing, and actually thrives on fire. And it's fairly easy to identify because it has this purplish bottlebrush seed head. So that's an image of bufflegrass up close. If there's no seeds left on that seed head, then you can see this sort of rough stem left behind. And that's another distinguishing feature of it. But bufflegrass, actually, in the beginning, when you're just getting to know the species, it actually can be easier to distinguish it from a distance. So in the distance here in Saguaro National Park, in the west side of Saguaro National Park, you can see a big patch of bufflegrass. The lighting's just right. So that's what buffelgrass does. Look at that patch there in the distance. Buffelgrass is filling in all this space. You see all this space that's characteristic of the Sonoran Desert between trees and shrubs and our cacti. It fills in all that open space, and it actually is outcompeting our native plants. So it's a fierce competitor. And given enough time, thanks to some work that Aaryn Olsson has done, we know that diversity of native plants goes down with the age of a buffelgrass plant patch. And so this patch here in the distance would have a lower plant diversity than, say, these areas over here. So it's actually transforming the desert into this grassland. And this grassland is dominated by a single species and has a much reduced diversity. So that's why it's a problem.
So, Kim, maybe you can talk a little bit about the challenges of trying to manage buffelgrass, because it's been around for a while, yet somehow we still haven't seemed to been able to get a handle on it.
Yeah, so buffelgrass is, as I mentioned, a really robust grass. It's difficult to manage. It seems to just thrive here in the Sonoran Desert for lack of competitors, for lack of predators. And it has been a challenge to manage it. So one of the biggest challenges is that we simply don't know where all the buffelgrass is or how much buffelgrass is out there. So I'm going to share my screen again. So here in southern Arizona, we live in a very jurisdictionally complex landscape. So these different colors correspond to different land management entities. So here you see the Tohono O'odham Nation. Out here we have Buenos Aires National Wildlife Refuge, Cabeza Prieta. We have lands that are managed by a variety of federal agencies, state agencies, and local agencies. And buffelgrass is a problem like most of our significant environmental problems. It crosses borders. It doesn't respect borders, jurisdictions. And coordinating all these different groups is what's required if we're really going to get a handle on the buffelgrass problem. And that's something that's challenging to do. So one of the things that the Desert Museum has done, and the reason we're able to do it is we built on past efforts from an organization called the Southern Arizona Buffelgrass Coordination Center. From that was born the Sonoran Desert Cooperative Weed Management Area. And it sounds pretty boring, a cooperative weed management area, but actually these are organizations that are common throughout the West. In fact, some states have many cooperative weed management areas, and they bring together partners within one geographic region to coordinate their efforts to fight invasive species. So that's one of the biggest challenges, is coordinating efforts and knowing where the buffelgrass is. So mapping invasive species is actually a really big challenge as well.
So when it comes to issues around buffelgrass, are the issues different depending on the land use or land type that you encounter, like say urban or natural areas, or is there different issues with the different jurisdictions and how that is having to be managed or how the cooperative works together? How does the Desert Museum help to facilitate those and deal with some of those issues? Maybe Ya-Ching, you could comment a little bit about that?
I would say the difference between the jurisdictions has more to do with the people factor than the grass environment factor, although there's some of that as well, because everyone has their own strategy, their own approach, their own staffing, and their own funding, and there's a lot of gaps, areas where no one is covering the problem or looking at it. And other places where they're working very intensely, but with very, very different methods. And to bring that all together to get an overview is actually a challenge. You saw the maps they distributed Pima County this week.
So Aaryn, how does this relate to urban issues and especially the urban fringe related to brush fires?
It's funny because I keep thinking back to when I was first involved in 2008, and we got all of these stakeholders together, and we thought, okay, Buffelgrass is going to be what everybody's interested in, and there were jurisdictions that were really interested in things like helianthus, the sunflowers that grow on the side of the road because they impede visibility. So the jurisdictions all have these different priorities. With regard to Buffelgrass, there are a lot of important issues in the urban areas. Like on roadsides, Buffelgrass is spreading along Interstate 10 and other areas. And there are brush fires. They're called brush fires, but they're really grass fires, and you can kind of follow the trail sometimes along the roads where the Buffelgrass fires have burned. But it's a very different problem than the problems that are faced by the large landholders, where Buffelgrass is invading these rather undisturbed ecosystems like the Arizona upland, where the saguaros and palo verdes are dominant. Like Saguaro National Park and Tucson Mountain Park and Catalina foothills, where the Coronado National Forest, where these are very large contiguous areas of undisturbed land.
Saguaro National Park, the Tucson Mountain District, you can see a big Buffelgrass patch in the distance. Here we are zoomed in on that patch. You can see how Buffelgrass pretty much dominates the surface there. Here's a landscape in Saguaro National Park, the Rincon Mountain District on the east side. This is an old patch of Buffelgrass. You can tell by the density of the grass there. And this is gives you a sense, I think, of the magnitude of the problem. And when you have these federal agencies that manage hundreds of thousands to millions of acres. And the land agency that manages the most acres is Coronado National Forest. So here we are in the Catalinas. You can see the Buffelgrass working its way up the slope. Here's Tuamac Hill, so right in the center of downtown. And then here is an image from urban Tucson. So this is on the south side of Tucson, a vacant lot. That's all green Buffelgrass. This image was taken in August, but imagine in a month from now, all that Buffelgrass will be dry and it will be highly flammable. And so it presents this fire threat in our urban environment. So yeah, definitely a problem both in the urban core, in the wildland urban interface, and our wildlands themselves.
Did Buffelgrass have much impact with the rather large fire that we had this year in the Bighorn Fire?
So here we are looking at the perimeter of the wildfire. So the wildfire is shown here in red, the Bighorn Fire. And then this map actually was created by Aaryn Olsson. All these aqua polygons are Buffelgrass patches. And so we overlaid the fire perimeter on top of this map of Buffelgrass that Aaryn created. The yellow dot here just notes the ignition point of the fire. And you can see there is some overlap, but the fire did not dip down into these mega patches of Buffelgrass down here. And currently we don't know why. One of our ideas is that the distribution of Buffelgrass is so patchy, and it's found in the Sonoran Desert. The Sonoran Desert is an environment that doesn't burn. There's just not enough fuel there. So when the fire reaches the edge of a Buffelgrass patch, it runs out of fuel. So perhaps that limited the spread of Buffelgrass downslope. It could have been the heroic efforts of the firefighting team. There was a very heavy aerial effort early on in the fire to prevent the fire from going downslope in some of these canyons near the homes in the Catalina foothills. But at this point, we haven't gotten on the ground yet. We're waiting for the opportunity, and we'll be able to say a lot more in a month or two from now.
I think this slide and this map really show basically what we're facing in the future. While all of that red area is basically fire adapted ecosystems. So it's hard to see in this map, but this is a sky island with increasing elevation toward the middle. We have, spruce, mixed conifer at the top, and it grades down into this oak woodland, and then down into a native or a desert grassland. And all of these ecosystems are fire adapted. And the ecosystem that basically rings the bottom of that is the Arizona upland. This is that ecosystem that's dominated by saguaros and palo verdes, and it's essentially fireproof. And so when fire burns down through that grassland, it hits the Arizona upland and it burns out. And we, think that the buffelgrass, which we know is highly flammable, will or may connect the bottom edge of that grassland to the wildland urban interface of Tucson. And we're not there yet. Buffelgrass is expanding. It's doubling every 3 to 7 years in terms of its area across that system. But these patches are quite discrete. And if you look at there was a fire in 2019, the Mercer fire. All right, this is zoomed in on the basically east side of the map that we just saw. The red area, those are buffelgrass patches that were hand digitized, and then this yellow area is the outline of the Mercer fire. And the Mercer fire was a lightning-caused fire. I actually saw it start, and it burned itself out in 12 hours in a very humid environment. So this is, it basically burned itself out because they hit the edges of the patch. And so this is, going back to why the Bighorn Fire didn't burn down to, the Tucson boundary, is there's just not enough connectivity. That's my hypothesis there. And we saw that with the Mercer fire burning out right at the edges of that, also supporting that.
Yeah, Aaryn, can you tell us a little bit about the importance of mapping efforts for buffelgrass control?
Yeah, for one, it's hard to gauge the level of effort required to allocate resources to the problem. So, you can look at it from a mathematical and from an acquisition standpoint, like how much does it cost to treat per acre? How much does it cost, to treat with hand crews that are digging or spraying with an herbicide, or even doing an aerial application? And all of those costs are, of course, they end up breaking down by units that translate to acreage. So that's one aspect of it is to be able to allocate resources. The other is to be able to engage in modeling efforts and understand, can I actually allocate enough and really get ahead of the problem? If the extent of buffelgrass is expanding by 1,000 acres a year, and you can only treat 500 acres a year, you're in a losing battle. And everybody's highly, I think, conscious of what exponential growth looks like in 2020. So, if you get behind, you're always going to be behind. And so those are really, it's just really key to be able to understand that. Of course, where to go strategically, what's important, and how are you going to prioritize what you are treating.
Yeah, and adding on to that, I just wanted to say that mapping buffelgrass itself is difficult. It's a big challenge. And the way that Aaryn created that map of buffelgrass in the Catalinas was really unusual. So Aaryn has tried, as well as many others have tried, to map buffelgrass with a variety of methods, remote sensing methods. But the way he did that map in the Catalinas was he used his eyes and he used imagery from Google Earth. So I don't know if you want to speak to that for a minute here, Aaryn.
Yeah, sure. So this is kind of zoomed in on these little quadrants, but I tessellated the whole area into these quadrants and kind of went one by one. And I'm, very tuned into what buffelgrass looks like because I've been doing it for 12, 13 years. And I just followed these boundaries and click, 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 click. And for better or for worse, this is okay. So let me say something about the GIS part of the map. Following these boundaries, clicked until I was able to close these polygons, and then within each quadrant, I would basically complete them and then move on to the next quadrant, and in the end, just union them all together to create this kind of synoptic view of the Catalinas. And for better or for worse, this is the result of many trials to use multispectral methods with different sensors, hyperspectral sensors, multi-temporal remote sensing approaches, and in the end, what was most effective and I think generated the most confidence was to actually utilize this human vision. And
so when you tried to do some of the remote sensing techniques, does Buffelgrass become difficult to run models like multispectral models on to catch it, and therefore the human techniques were better?
Yeah, so it's really easy to see with our eyes, right? It's, in this case, this was in 2007 in November, and we could see it, so we knew we should be able to detect it spectrally. But using a multispectral approach with Landsat, Aster, photos, and from low or moderate resolution sensors with a maximum likelihood classification, I got really poor results. And this was done at a time when the Park Service was looking for these repeatable methods for tracking buffelgrass, and it was pretty discouraging. I kind of looking back on it, we know that there's I think that there's just this really nuanced timing associated with when it looks green like that. It doesn't look green like that anymore. That was a kind of a special phenological event, and so you could look at things over time, but then you end up with this additional complications of the phenology in the desert, where if you kind of step back and look at remote sensing phenology, there's this whole field of detecting when things are greening up, when things are flowering, when things are senescing, and tying that to climate, which is really interesting. And applying it to arid ecosystems like the Sonoran Desert ends up being a little bit more difficult because we don't have that huge, full regional synchronization where everything greens up at the same time, because the cueing is not temperature but precipitation. And when we get precipitation, it's so especially heterogeneous that if you are trying to look for a signal like, oh, well, buffelgrass greens up faster and it senesces faster, and so maybe you have a spikier time signal, it's not guaranteed that that's going to be buffelgrass. It may just be that it rained there and it didn't rain here.
So how much time did it take to do, like parts of the Catalina Mountains? Did you, and how are those efforts in terms of repeatability for future mapping?
I don't know. I ended up probably putting in like 50 hours into that. I don't know exactly. And it's not that repeatable. I mean, it is repeatable. I think it's difficult to compare. It would be difficult for me to compare my effort in the future or someone else's effort in the future to what I did this year. And using Google Earth, the imagery has different dates in different places, and there's I've varying confidence in some places versus others because I may be familiar with the area, or the soil background may be darker, and so the grass may be more difficult to detect, or the imagery is lower quality there. So there's a lot of variables that do make that difficult.
So we were also talking about how it's not a one-time effort either. And when we think of mapping, the grass will grow back. It comes back without continued efforts. With mapping efforts, do you do different types of analysis sometimes with like looking at places that have been treated or hand pulled and then go back and map those, try to get them at certain durations in the future? And how maybe is the Sonoran Desert Museum aiding in those, or trying to aid in those efforts? Because it just sounds like a lot of work for like one person that has more than one job and a life, Aaryn, that to take on for the rest of his life here. So I'm just kind of curious. That's a very broad question on my part, but on how do we continually manage this, and how does mapping kind of fit in with those?
Well, I've been thinking about this a lot. When I was doing this as part of my my degree, I was really focused on these spectral approaches. At the same time, you've seen all of these facial recognition software. This whole world of computer vision is blown up with these deep learning models, and that's something that we've never really tried here. And I think with these modern deep learning convolution neural net approaches to image segmentation and object detection, that we would be able to do a much better job with a standardized, homogenized data set. And looking at some of the same approaches through time, I think could be really useful. And I think as much as anything, what we really need is interest from the community and from young entrepreneurs, students that are looking for something to really sink their teeth into and really try these next gen methods.
Yeah, just to add on to that a little bit, one of the methods that Coronado and Saguaro National Park were using to map their buffelgrass at one point was they would put observers in helicopters that would go over the terrain, and they would sketch on tablets. It gave them an estimate of the total acreage, but the precision was quite low. They would often go and find that there was no buffelgrass where it had been mapped. And what Aaryn has produced seems to be so far of much higher quality. We still would like to do a bit more ground truthing of that, but it's quite extraordinary. But I think you were saying, Aaryn, that, for example, it would be quite difficult to reproduce it in the Tucson mountains, right?
Yeah, I looked at this a lot in the Tucson mountains. In the Tucson mountains, the soil background is darker, and the climate's a little different. It's a little drier, and so the buffelgrass isn't as dense, the plants aren't as big, and so it doesn't stand out as much as it does in the Catalinas and the Rincons. So it does make it more difficult. On the other hand, it's also a testament to a lot of the great work that the Sonoran Desert Weed Whackers have done in treating, the Tucson mountains for, how many years has it been, Kim? They've been doing that?
20 years now.
Yeah.
I'd like to, when I showed those images earlier of just these immense stands of buffelgrass in our wilderness areas, and it can seem like an insurmountable problem, but really we have a great example of how just a dedicated group, a small group of a few dozen people have managed to maintain Tucson Mountain Park pretty much largely free of buffelgrass for the past 20 years. So in Tucson Mountain Park, here is a group of volunteers out there digging up buffelgrass. So that's one of the methods that we use to get rid of buffelgrass, is just simply digging it up. And that method is actually quite effective. They leave the plants in the environment, so it's not like we are carrying those plants out of the park. They are laid on top of each other in a specific way that reduces the chance that seedlings will germinate under them. And so this group of volunteers has really maintained Tucson Mountain Park largely free of buffelgrass. And thanks to their efforts, we still have some of the densest stands of saguaros in the world. If you were to drive over Gates Pass today and you see those beautiful stands of saguaros, it's thanks to the Sonoran Desert Weed Whackers. And if anyone out there is interested in helping out, or even if you're just interested in studying and working on this problem, I would encourage you to spend at least one day in the field with this group. And you can go to buffelgrass.org, and there you'll find an option to sign up for a buffelgrass pull. There's lots going on across the Tucson Basin.
The weather now has finally broken, and it's actually really nice to go out and pull.
Yeah, actually we're in a pandemic, and so being able to go out and actually do something is great. Given how limited we are right now.
And just another point to add, the nice map that Aaryn made is probably not precise enough for statistical analysis, very precise statistical analysis. It will show change over time if it is of very large magnitude. But it still has been quite useful. Recently, after the Bighorn Fire, Pima Flood Control used it to try to estimate areas that would be more affected by flash floods.
So since we're speaking with the GIS community today, and there may be people that want to get involved and help out with some mapping efforts, or as well as getting out in the field and pulling some buffelgrass. We've learned how that they can get their hands dirty and get out in the field by going to buffelgrass.org. But what if you wanted to do a little bit of mapping or help out? How can they get involved? What should they be doing?
Sure. We have had some interns from the GIST program helping us out a bit in the past. And we have one now actually helping us develop a website for our volunteers. So there are some possibilities for people who want to volunteer and help out a bit with our mapping. So contact us, Arizona Sonora Desert Museum.
In terms of the importance of an awareness campaign, how important has it been to inform the community about the issue of buffelgrass in the Tucson area and in Southern Arizona in general? Kim?
I think it's incredibly important to let the public know about buffelgrass and what the buffelgrass threat really means for our community. So buffelgrass, with or without fire, is transforming the desert into a grassland, into a highly flammable grassland. So currently, the city of Tucson is surrounded by these beautiful mountain ranges that at their bases have this saguaro palo verde forest, which is probably a big reason that many people move here, and certainly why we have all these resorts nestled in the foothills of these mountains. If we do nothing about buffelgrass, slowly over time, we're going to lose those saguaro palo verde forests, and that's going to just change the character of the place that we live. If we are unlucky and we have another big fire, one that maybe starts lower in elevation, we could lose those saguaro palo verde forests very rapidly, literally almost overnight. And so I think the public having an understanding of that's what's at stake is important, so that we can all participate in making decisions about the future of our community. It's an incredible place to live, Pima County, because people are so involved in caring for the natural environment. So yeah, it's one of the biggest pieces of our work at the Desert Museum is to spread the awareness and education.
Are there other species like buffelgrass that we should be concerned about that might not get quite as much of attention?
Yeah, there are a lot of invasive grasses. So buffelgrass is a little bit different in that it's a perennial, and a lot of the invasive grasses are annuals. And actually one that was really abundant this past year that probably burned in the Bighorn Fire was red brome. Actually, we had the Bighorn Fire earlier in the summer, currently there are, I think today, 20-something fires burning in California alone, as well as many fires in Oregon and in Colorado and in Arizona itself. Here's an image from the LA Times of the Mojave Desert. This area burned in large part because of an invasive grass called red brome that I was just talking about that's growing here in the Catalinas, and was especially abundant on the west side of the Catalinas this year. Those are all Joshua trees. 1.3 million Joshua trees were burned in this fire. So it's sort of a wake-up call. This is what could happen here if we decide to do nothing about this. Another invasive species that's spreading incredibly fast right now is stinknet. This is a species that actually is kind of pretty. It's also known as globe chamomile. It's not the kind of chamomile that you make tea out of, but it forms these incredibly dense stands. And when those stands of the plant dry out, they're highly flammable, and the acridity of the smoke that it produces has actually landed some people in the hospital. And so this plant is exploding right now in the Phoenix area. We're on the lookout here. If you do see this plant, which you would see it probably in the winter, it has these highly divided leaves. You won't see these flower heads until later in the spring, but you should contact the Arizona Native Plant Society. So yeah, there are definitely other plants that present a significant threat here. I think the reason we're so focused on buffelgrass is because buffelgrass has this potential to transform the desert, unlike any other plant that currently is invading the desert has. So it's just this incredibly powerful transformative effect. And there's so many invasive species we have to prioritize.
So what are we looking at here, Aaryn?
I remember I was talking about remote sensing phenology as this emergent discipline. It is a lot more complicated in arid lands for precisely this reason. Our phenology is cued by precipitation events in the summer at the onset of the monsoon. So you may have a green up event in one place, and it's related to the fact that it rained there. And it's interesting because from a remote sensing standpoint, that was one of the things that I looked at with Landsat. And so this is a pair of Landsat scenes from August 14th, 2007 to August 30th, 2007. And just taking the NDVI from those two times, I was able to identify those large patches of buffelgrass. And in fact, if you look here, this is the outline of the Mercer fire. This is that patch back in 2007. This over here is in the background of one of the shots that Kim showed earlier. And this right here is another one of the shots that we saw earlier. So you can see it and actually differentiate buffelgrass from the native vegetation based on that amplitude, that rapid green up. But this is the same area the next year. And I picked this one out not because it was different, but because it was the best that I could find. And actually just trying that, like looking at the change in NDVI between two different sequential Landsat scenes over many, many months, I found that sometimes you could get it. This was that great time in 2007 that worked really well. But most of the time there was really no difference. And so this kind of shows why my original experiments with the maximum likelihood classifier didn't work very well, as I just didn't have great dates. And this seems like it would be a great formula, but we have this problem. We have this spatial heterogeneity of phenology. So anyway, it's a good idea, but maybe it's worth pursuing, but it's really not like the tool that is going to help Coronado National Forest or Solara National Park measure over time where buffelgrass is and use that for planning purposes.
Aaryn, is this something that, and you kind of hinted at this earlier, where we're getting into sort of the big data realm of remote sensing, like what your company Planet does. and as well as like what Google Engine is doing, where if you have massive amounts of remote sensing data compiled, does it, and with a little bit of machine learning possibly, or other techniques that we could start teasing out some of this better, or is it still kind of in the development stage, if you will?
It's absolutely in the development stage, but the tools are there, the data is there, and it's coming even further. I'm really excited about what we're going to be seeing in 2021 and 2022. But this is an example, just one of many examples, and a lot of the deep learning is focused on, it kind of started with this object detection thing, like, oh, look, there's a bunny or there's a cat in a picture, and then it's facial recognition, and that's kind of one aspect. The other is this segmentation approach, where we're actually setting every pixel to be to belong one class or another. And one of the big applications of that has been building detection. And so you'll see a lot of literature out there with respect to building detection. And this is just some example that I picked, where they're basically classifying different houses based on the the roof characteristics, and it uses texture in a way that the spectral approaches don't. So, I think there's a lot of opportunity there for taking these approaches to natural resource and environment problems that is really largely untapped.
No, that is very exciting to see how the technology and data and access to the data is really changing sort of our geospatial approaches to environmental issues. I want to thank everyone for joining us today on the GIST podcast, and know that we'll be seeing you all around in the community in the future, in the post-pandemic future, and online. And I encourage you all to visit virtually and in person the Sonoran Desert Museum and learn about some of the efforts that they're doing with Buffelgrass, as well as just the educational efforts that they're doing. It's one of the amazing resources that we have in the Tucson area, and we're so grateful for the museum and for the three of you and your efforts with Buffelgrass. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having us. It was a pleasure to be here.
Definitely.